You're live, although I'm not live.
Oh, there it goes. Okay.
So it's slightly behind.
Okay.
Oh, nobody here yet.
Got it.
Okay, we got 5 guys here already. This is running with a little bit of a delay, so this is going to be a bit weird. We're going to wait a couple minutes to start and let everybody get a chance to settle in, grab a drink. This is not really set for a time limit, so I may talk for an hour, I may talk for 2. I'll take questions. I'm going to kind of free flow through this. If I do a video, then I usually write a script and I'll try to read that script off and then try to make it as human as possible. But my experience doing clinics is I'll go in with a particular idea of how I'm going to run a clinic. Let's say it was a summer clinic for a bunch of 8 through 12-year-olds. And I'll go in with a particular agenda, and then as soon as I get there, I meet the personalities of the people who are there, and suddenly I have to kind of work on the fly. So I'm going to sort of work on the fly, have an agenda, I have particular slides that we're going to use and talk about with this, and get subject matter rolling. And what that subject matter is we are going to be discussing, or I am going to be discussing, the misconceptions and misinterpretations of the Ted Williams hitting philosophy. And what that has done is created a paradigm that everyone is swinging up, as we know, or many hitters are swinging up. This conversation was really motivated by the driveline guys, and most particularly in the recent past, a guy named Devin Morgan. And we'll talk about Devin in a moment, and his contribution. He motivated the webcast that we're doing here today, because I asked him if he wanted to do a podcast talking about Ted Williams, because he was discussing various swing up and all this stuff, and we'll show you some slides about that. And then when I suggested we should webcast, since we can't really talk about this on Twitter, being limited to characters, then he called me wildly reckless and blocked me. Which I think is the patent default of the driveline guys. As soon as you say something that confuses them or might possibly prove them wrong or whatever, challenge them in any way, when they run out of ammunition or they feel like they're outmanned, then they block you. So that's been their modus operandi. Let's see. We have 4 of us here, and this is going to be recorded anyway, so I guess I'm going to get started. If anybody has any questions or anything like that, just pop them up, and I'll occasionally be looking at my stream of comments. So let's move on to Devin Morgan. Devin Morgan is the youth director of Shoreline Little League, and I'm very familiar with Shoreline Little League. I've worked with a lot of these kids over the years. I trained out of Dave Snell's facility for a couple of years, just prior to my moving back home to California. And Dave Snell, father of now current San Diego Padre Blake Snell, they're pretty heavily steeped in the whole Shoreline. I don't think I've ever met Devin. And he, first of all, he has what I would describe as the modern philosophy of hitting, talking about swinging up at the ball and how upswings are going to create backspin and things like this, or level swings create backspin, and we'll get into all of that stuff. So Devin, next slide here will show you, is he's going to say swing level, commonly called down, and the tendency is to bring the top hand over the ball at impact, and the effect is to hammer attack stroke or almost roll, and that's not what you want. Well, as a lot of you know, swinging down to the ball has everything to do with what our hands are doing. And if our hands are starting here above the ball, we're always going to be swinging down to the ball. So somehow we have to get down there. what happens with our bat over the course of its arc, the bat changes. We'll talk about Ted Williams and how his bat does some interesting things based on his particular brain wiring. So we'll get into that later also. But swinging down to the ball does not mean you're swinging down on the ball, right? Okay, so that's one misconception that I keep hearing. And we'll go off on some tangents today also, because we'll talk about swinging down, and we'll talk about different aspects of your bat's arc and things like that. So on our next slide, we have Devin talking about any carry gained from extra backspin is minuscule in comparison to the carry hitter loses by cutting down through the ball and losing exit velocity. Okay, so first of all, again, bear with me. Let's go to our regular screen now. We don't actually, I don't know anybody who teaches to swing down and make contact where the barrel is coming down. I've never seen that before. That's the product of being late generally. And so I don't see guys doing that. What I see is a bat coming down to the ball, changing arc, becoming flat and level, and then lifting. And that's where we'll start talking about Ted Williams later. But you'll lose exit velocity. It has nothing to do with if you were to catch the ball here as opposed to here. So this, we don't even care about exit velocity if we were swinging down on the ball. I think he's talking about sort of cutting the ball like this, like a tennis player might, and that's pretty ridiculous. So we're going to lose a bit of exit velocity in respect, and I mean a bit, a minuscule amount. And I did a whole study on this, and we'll talk about that later. But if a ball's traveling down at a, let's say, 6-8 degree angle, and I were to meet it at a 0 degree angle, which means that I met it right when the barrel became equal, let's see if I can do this on the camera, equal to my hands, then there's going to be a bit of what we call coefficient of restitution. There's going to be some burn off of energy because there's going to be this ball coming in this direction and this bat coming in this direction. The amount of energy burned off, particularly when you're hitting it off the sweet spot, is going to be really, really minimal. So that was a nonsensical comment right there when he was talking about losing exit velocity. The second thing is, and I've shown you some videos of this before, is if I were to catch the ball directly in the middle of the ball, directly in the middle of my bat, it's going to go on a line, and because it's coming down, we're going to get backspin. Now, if I were to catch the ball slightly below the middle of the ball, and slightly below the middle of my bat, this is what we call a tangential collision, then I'm going to create lift and a bit more backspin. So that's ultimately how you see a line drive that kind of drives upward. And then, obviously, if I were to miss this ball, bottom of my bat, top of the ball, then the ball's going to go down. It's going to have top spin. So what he's saying there made no sense to me. It's totally illogical. Do we have anything else that Mr. Devin said? Okay, so here we go. This is really common when we see this slide here. And that is, the whole conversation began because Chipper Jones had put out a video that was floating around Twitter for a while. And what Chipper Jones had said was that he swung down to the ball. And he suggested that hitters should swing down to the ball. And so Devin says Ted was right. And if that means Chipper Jones was wrong, then so be it. So Devin, who's played about 0 seconds in the major leagues, Devin, who is a little league guy, Devin, who has probably never coached a single big leaguer in his life. I'd be surprised if he coached any professional baseball players, but he's okay because he's going to stand on Ted's shoulders and say, Ted's right. I read his book. Well, let me tell you something. You misread his book, and that's what this whole conversation is about. In this picture you're looking at, on the top, we have, and this is really bizarre. You changed something. I did not change.
You didn't want it changed? Okay.
It's fine. Let's just leave it here. Okay, so on this, we have a slight upstroke matches the trajectory of the incoming pitch, increasing the area of solid contact. Okay, well, this isn't true. and we get to the next one where we have the level stroke with a smaller impact. First of all, impact with the ball is instantaneous. It really doesn't matter what path you travel to get there. It all matters with what path you were on when you were making contact. This illustration, and I'm sorry, it's a misinterpretation, and even Ted is not always terrific at explaining things. And this is historical, and so I'm not necessarily challenging Ted Williams, and we'll get to that later because we'll talk about. I've taught every hitter I ever trained the tenets of Ted Williams' philosophy, but the barrel is not only moving forward as our hands carry it forward, the barrel is also turning. And so if my sweet spot were on the ball here, right? Or if the ball were going to meet my sweet spot right here, then if I met it further out here, the barrel would continue to turn. And now you see I'm towards the end of the bat. And if I met it further over here, then I'm really towards the end of the bat. And if I try to meet more over here, I'm completely off the end of the bat. And so you don't have a longer or greater expanse of barrel contact with the ball. And that's one of the things that I won't be talking about today, which is pushing the barrel. That will be a whole nother discussion because I don't know how you could possibly push a barrel. But in any case, this is kind of, I think this is where a lot of this is born of. And so Driveline does have a connection with a guy named Dr. or Professor Alan Nathan. Alan Nathan is let's go to a full screen. Alan Nathan is the physicist that MLB uses, that Driveline is connected with and uses and discusses their hitting philosophies with. And who else? Blast Motion, Diamond Kinetics, they all base their stuff off of this swing philosophy or this optimal attack angle. And this was an article that let's see. That was an article that Alan Nathan wrote. I think it was in, I can't find the mouse, 2017 or something like that. And it was called Optimal Attack Angle for Optimal Launch Distance. It was on Fangraphs. And I had a discussion, because after reading this, I was incensed, because what Alan Nathan was talking about was hitting the ball, and basing all of this on his love of Ted Williams. Alan Nathan is a Bostonian, a physicist. By the looks of him, he probably never played a game of baseball in his life, and I had some telephone conversations with him. And in those conversations, I started talking about different attack points and contact points. And he said, wait, I don't know what you're saying. And I tried to explain to him that if I were looking for optimal distance of a swing, I wouldn't be choosing a pitch over the middle of the plate that I was hitting to dead center field, which was what his study was based on. And so he did his study in a vacuum. It was saying, okay, mathematically, if this were to happen, then this is the result. So there's a lot of if then in there. And he was comparing one swing to another and saying this would have a greater launch distance, but he's assuming that A, you could achieve the same bat speed with two different paths, which you can do that in a vacuum, but that doesn't have anything to do with reality. And secondly, if you ever watch Home Run Derby, you'll find that, and if you look at the annals of baseball history, if you look at the longest hit balls in history, they're all going to be to pull fields. Our bat is going to, let's think of our bat as taking a 3/3 of an arc, okay? So 3/3 of an arc is where we're going to make contact with the ball. On the first third of our arc, we're going to be hitting the ball to the opposite field. So that would be here. We're going to be generating less bat speed. That's why, it's so coveted to find a hitter who can hit a ball to the opposite field for power, because you're really only getting a third of your swing when you're hitting the ball. And so you can't generate that much speed unless you're a really, really strong, quick hitter. And so that's 1/3 of our swing. 2/3 of our swing would be right over the middle of the plate, right hitting center field. And then the final third of our swing occurs when our barrel passes our hands and starts to turn. What happens when the barrel starts to turn is this bat is a double pendulum. When this tip goes forward, this tip goes away from it. So it works like this. So when we are attacking towards the ball, we're actually pulling, and then we are guiding the ball. We're guiding the barrel and the bat with our hands. So it might flop down here if I wanted to, if I had really good fine motor or muscle skills, then my bat might be a little floppier than other guys. Some guys might have a little more control over it because they're more gross and more inclined to be tighter and use their larger muscles. So what happens is we're pulling, and then we're basically guiding, we're relaxing, and now as the barrel, the heaviest part of this bat, starts to carry past our hands, now we're actually pulling opposite. And so we're actually drawing the bat back towards us, very, very similarly to how you would throw a whip. When you throw a whip and you hear that crack, the crack is actually a sonic boom. And what we're hearing is a portion of the whip actually just below the tip of the whip. I think it's about 3 inches below the tip of the whip. And it is passing the sound barrier. It is going faster than 756 miles an hour. The tip itself is traveling somewhere around 2,000 miles an hour. All of this can be looked up. So the technique of throwing a whip is the whip is a very loose object. And so what we want to do is throw the loose object, allow the life of the loose object to move, and then as it gets to this point here, we're going to offer an opposite equal reaction. And the whip doesn't weigh a lot, so it's not like we have to tug hard back on it, but we offer an opposite equal reaction to the whip going forward. And so now this creates a centripetal whip. And so now we have this incredible whipping quickness that occurs. If I were to work tightly with this whip and extend my arm and move it as fast as I possibly could, the whip would become a continuation or extension of my body. I cannot get my hand, and no human on the planet could get their hand to move 756 miles an hour unless it was attached to a jet fighter. So the whip, if I were to remain attached and stiff with it, the whip would basically move the speed of my hand. And you'll notice if you guys have a swing sensor that your hand speed is going to be slower than your barrel speed. The barrel has a life of its own. It moves as if I threw this, it wouldn't fly like an arrow, first of all, because it's disproportionate in its weight proportions. So it's light here, heavy here. And so it would spin like a helicopter. So next we'll move on to the next slide, which Alan Nathan was discussing his swing philosophy and suggesting that and this is what most people didn't read. They didn't get to the end of it, and I find that most people don't read entire studies and get to the end. The optimal attack angle is about 18 degrees, which is significantly greater than the descent angle of 6 degrees for a fastball. While such a swing might optimize the batted ball distance, it's not too forgiving if the swing is mistimed. And so I think that's a really important thing to hear. It's not just mistimed, by the way, also back to a full screen. It's not just that you have to time it perfectly, but you can time the ball perfectly. Let's see. Because also if you continue to read in Alan Nathan's study, that there's something called an offset that's necessary. And an offset would be, as this bat's traveling up here, let's see if I can get an angle. If this bat's traveling up here towards this ball, if it meets it squarely in the middle of each, then the ball's going to knuckle. And any of you have played infield or even outfield, it happens occasionally. The ball is perfectly met and no spin whatsoever. Now, if I were to miss by 1 inch on Alan Nathan's optimal attack angle of 17, 18 degrees, then I'd probably hit a home run to center field if I could generate enough bat speed to do that, and we'll get to that later on. And then if I missed by 1 inch and a half of an inch, so 1.5 inches, this is a routine fly ball. So we've got a knuckleball, we've got a ground ball, and we've got a routine fly ball, and then in between all of that, where we have to be absolutely perfect, is where we'll get our home run. With other swings that don't have such extreme attack angles, you can still hit home runs, and the swing is much more forgiving, and that's where Alan Nathan was talking about it's not forgiving. So let's get into, we've talked about where the paradigm was created, where people are misinterpreting Ted Williams. I'm going to discuss that at length now, but we're going to talk about what we just talked about. Alan Nathan is his contribution to that, and how now these ideas are now backed by science, which they are not. If he was talking about pulling a ball, then Alan Nathan and I would have never had this conversation, because if you were swinging down to get to the ball, and this is where Ted Williams comes into this discussion, you became flat here, right over the middle of the plate, the bat arcs and works its way back up to its finished position up here, right? And so Ted Williams, for those of you, Devin and others, Ted Williams was a dead pull hitter. In fact, in 1946, Lou Boudreau put up the first known shift, although there were actually shifts before that. Another guy named Williams, by the name of Cy Williams, back in 1920, 1926, was a dead pull hitter who admittedly, he said, I can't hit a ball to, he was a left-handed hitter like Ted, and he said, I can't hit a ball to left field to save my life. So that was when the shift was really first introduced, but then Ted Williams made it famous, and it stuck with Ted Williams for quite a while. So in 1946, in July of 1946, Lou Boudreau, manager for the Indians, employed a shift on Ted Williams. That same shift was applied in the World Series against the Cardinals, where Ted went 5 for 25 and was harangued by the Boston crowd, and they called for his head. So basically what we have here is a dead pull hitter, which means they're looking to catch the ball at the ascent of their bat. This is what Griffey Jr. did. This is what many Barry Bonds, great hitters, were doing. When you can master pulling, that's going to be a whole other conversation for another day or another podcast where we'll talk about the importance of being able to pull the ball correctly and learning how to do that, and how that is a lost art in baseball currently. So let's go on to, let's take Ted with his own words, first of all. Let's see, that's in the beginning of the video. In 1961, he put out a record for Sears and Roebuck, and that was tips on hitting by Ted Williams or something like that. And then later on, he made another video, this time in 1974, which was the video version of his book, The Science of Hitting. And try to remember, Ted Williams is now retired. This is when Ted Williams starts to talk about his swing. So in 1961, people are saying, okay, you're retired, we don't get to watch you anymore, the greatest hitter of all time. So what are your philosophies of hitting? We understand that you really study hitting a lot. And Ted says this.
Here are a few rules to follow. Number one, the best swing is a level swing. It is better to swing slightly down rather than an uppercut swing.
Okay, so now let's transition back to me and leave that where it is, because I'm going to start it up where I have it paused. Okay, so Ted says that swinging down is okay, not a bad idea. He's probably at this point started to observe his swing and think about his history of what he was doing as a hitter. Swinging level, and when I show you some videos of Ted, you're going to see he swings extremely level for much of his swing path. And then lastly, he says this. So we're going to transition here.
Here are a few rules to follow.
So we'll go over this again.
Number one, the best swing is a level swing. It is better to swing slightly down rather than an uppercut swing.
A lot of people say to swing level, which isn't too bad. Others say to swing down with the ball, which I think is real bad. But to me, the ideal swing has always been one that was slightly up, slightly up.
Okay, so who do you believe? Let's go on to our next video of Ted Snips. So who do you believe? The Ted Williams in 1961, who was fresh out of playing Major League Baseball for a year and was now observing his swing and describing what he was doing. Or do you believe the 1974 version of the slightly upswing? Well, here's the interesting thing. They're both right. If you were talking about attack angles now, as opposed to swinging, if you're talking about attack angles, then yes, it would be extremely undesirable to hit the ball when you're swinging down at the ball. And I don't think there are many people out there who would argue with that. Swinging level is okay. It is a much slower swing, but I wouldn't recommend that. I would still swing down to get to level as opposed to dropping my barrel and going flat, which is what you'll see a lot of amateur kids who are told to hit line drives. So that's okay. But if you were to swing level again, at some point your barrel's going to come up. Now, Ted Williams says, I think the ideal swing is slightly up, slightly up. And so let's take a look at Ted Williams in 1974 demonstrating his swing.
As I make my decision to swing, my hips lead the way, opening up into the pitch, and the shoulders follow. My hands and forearms supply that direction. Now once more from the side. Watch for the cocking of the knees, the hips and the hands as I stride. My hips clearly open up before my shoulders begin to bring arms and bat around. The bat lowering and flattening out to come into the same plane as the pitch. It is a slight upswing.
Okay, so transition back to me. And it isn't a slight upswing. It was a very level swing, if you've noticed. He pitches his barrel. This is teacher man stuff, and believe me, you don't need to throw your barrel back. When you tuck your arm and your intent is to go at the ball here, then your barrel's going to flatten behind you anyways. So you'll notice on that video that Ted was actually making contact at the ascent of his bat. The reason being is Ted was a pull hitter. And so if he had made contact further back, then it would have been a line drive because his bat was in its flat plane of its swing. And so let's watch that video one more time and take notice of what his bat's doing and notice how flat that bat swing is.
My hips lead the way.
Here he's really quite level with his swing, and now at the ascent out front, his barrel goes back up. One more time.
The hips and the hands as I stride.
We're going to watch that back elbow tuck in and bring that barrel down and around. Here we go. And now it's flat, even the drawing is flat. And then at the ascent of his bat is where he's making contact. That's just your basic standard pull hitting. Let's go to the picture of Ted Williams. Perfect. Okay, so here we have a couple stills of it. On the left, we have a picture of Ted on his way to it, and you're going to see that bat path is very flat, coming from his butt forward. And then where he makes his contact out front, you see the bat start to lift up. Okay, so does this resemble, let's see no, not yet. Let's go to Joey Gallo. This is very, very commonly what I see with swings today. This is what we're teaching. This is our interpretation of Ted Williams. This is what, oh, Ted says swing up on the ball. So there's our swinging up at the ball. Let's go to the comparison between Joey Gallo and Ted Williams. Slow-mo. There's Ted pulling the ball, pretty flat path to it, and then out in front catching it. None of that crazy vertical bat angle down below the ball coming back to it. Let's go run one more time through that. Again, Ted, flat and then lift versus up the entire way. And so this is what a lot of guys are being taught. And let's jump over and show old Chaz. So our buddy Chaz over at, not yet, our buddy, let's go to me. Our buddy Chaz over at Baseball Rebellion. He's even built a tee so you can pull this one off. It's called the launch angle tee. And despite that, you know, there's no such thing as a launch angle swing. Launch angles is what happens to the ball after you hit it. The paradigm is essentially, we call this a launch angle swing, a swing that is designed to create an optimal lift. Okay, and so again, we have this guy. Let's jump onto this video. This looks just like Joey Gallo, if you ask me. Nothing like Ted Williams, exactly like Joey Gallo. Let it loop. So we'll watch this a couple times. It's a big drop. Doesn't look anything like Ted Williams' swing as far as I'm concerned. And, okay, good. Now let's go over and take a look at, so click the camera. Let's go take a look at Ted Williams taking several swings.
This one?
No, it's going to say Ted swinging. Yes, good. Okay, and so now look, we're going to look at Ted Williams. And again, let's try to keep in mind what it looked like when Joey Gallo was swinging. Let's get a look at, and by the way, Joey Gallo hits prodigious home runs. Very, very, very strong guy. 208 career batting average. Okay, so let's get to Ted with a more forgiving swing and take a look at that and try to keep in mind what Joey and Launch Angle T were producing. And let's see if any of these swings on any of these locations look anything like what we saw with...
Watch Ted's action in this slow motion picture of him hitting the ball. His wrists break just after he contacts the ball.
Excellent. Okay, so what we have there is sometimes you'll see the barrel a bit more below his hands. And I talked earlier about Ted's brain type, and you can look this up also. Ted was an ISTP. An ISTP is the ultimate athlete. And the reason why they're ultimate athlete, let's forget about the emotional focus, drive aspects of that athlete. They're known as the great white shark. But what makes them exceptional not only is the way that they approach competition, the way they are able to ignore failure, but more importantly, they are both gross and fine motor skill athletes. And if you looked at a career possibility for an ISTP, and the tests called the Myers-Briggs or the Keirsey type tests, these all will give you a profile of your brain wiring or hardwired tendencies. And many corporations, Major League Baseball gives these tests out or a version of, because they're looking for specific brain types for specific jobs. Well, Major League Baseball, they're particularly out there hunting the ISTP. And the ISTP, aside from, again, those brain characteristics, is a fine motor and gross motor skill athlete. Most athletes are gross motor dominant, usually, you know, lower body heavy people. Others are fine motor, but not particularly great with their gross motor, which means they don't have the best of balance and they're not really that tremendously coordinated. And then you have this fantastic, incredible balance of a guy who is both skilled and not just has a tendency towards, but is skilled at gross motor, skilled at fine motor skills. And when fine motor skills, again, the job profile for those guys, as far as their athleticism is concerned, is professional athlete, Michael Jordan, ISTP, Wayne Gretzky, ISTP, Pete Rose, Ted Williams, Ty Cobb, the list goes on and on and on. They have another job aside from major league athlete or professional athlete is surgeon, artist, because of their fine motor skills. Now, a lot of instructors, not me, will look at Ted Williams or another hitter and try to replicate what they're doing with a hitter and say, well, Ted does this, so therefore you do this. Well, that's the equivalent of you saying, okay, well, Rembrandt painted this, so you go out and paint it. So you just, unless you were color by numbers, you just wouldn't do it because you don't have the fine motor skills of a gifted artist. Ted Williams was a gifted artist. And so you see a lot of really noodle type movement with his barrel because his hands are so inclined towards this kind of artistic movements to where he can get the barrel to do anything he wants to. Ty Cobb, great example of that. You can get the barrel to do whatever you want to. And so you'll see things in a fine motor athlete that you just aren't going to be be able to replicate with an athlete that doesn't have those type of motor tendencies. And so you pretty much want to stick to the finding out what the strengths and weaknesses is of your hitters. And then kind of training them towards that. And essentially, your hand-eye coordination, people talk about that being the big gift that makes a great baseball player. It's timing, and that's another discussion. But hand-eye coordination, I don't know anybody who doesn't have it unless they had some sort of brain injury or CNS problem. I look at an object, my eyes go to the object, my hand goes to the object, right? So it's a pretty simple thing. If I'm looking at a baseball flying towards me, if I'm looking at that ball, my hands really almost can't help but go to it. What affects the outcome is our timing, our decision of when to swing based on the movement of that ball, and the spin and the quickness and all that stuff, and then coordinating that with our own movements. There's that, or if we were to intervene. And what I mean by intervene is if suddenly, when my hands were being directed to go to that ball, my conscious self said, okay, let's do something. And we start like tightening and things. And when I tighten, then my barrel starts to pull away from the ball. Or if I were to lean while I was swinging, then my barrel would now be here, because we talk about hand-eye coordination. And my hands are going to the object, but my bat is now tilting this way. My brain doesn't compensate for that. My brain doesn't understand. And so that's another discussion another day when we'll talk about tying hand-eye coordination to particular things like bend and a guy like Mike Trout. So that's a whole new conversation. So let's move on to, I asked this thing to stop with the don't go to rest ever. When you are swinging up the way Joey Gallo is, when you're swinging up the way Chaz at Baseball Rebellion is teaching you with that tee, there are two possible outcomes, right? One of those outcomes is not a line drive, which a line drive will result in a base hit 69 point something, it's like 70% of the time if you hit a line drive, you get a base hit. 23% of the time if you hit a fly ball, you will get a base hit, which means a home run or a double off the wall or something like that. 26 or 28, I can't remember which of those, a ground ball will result in a base hit. Now, a fly ball will result in more runs than a ground ball, yes, but it will not result in more hits. And if you're swinging up at a ball, think about this. If the barrel's working up, there's virtually no way to hit a backspin line drive. It just can't happen because this barrel is moving this direction as it's trying to attack the ball. So your outcomes are going to be a fly ball, or your outcome is going to be a ground ball. Now, interesting, swinging up ground ball. So let's show you from Ted Williams' video, Al Kaline. And Al Kaline, and if I were to have made Ted Williams' video and been the editor in the Bay, I would have said, this swing of Al Kaline, no good. The swing was fine, but the result was poor because he was early. So let's see what happens when you're early while making contact. And Al is not taking an upswing. Al is actually making contact as the barrel begins to ascend. And the guy who's talking here, I don't know who that is, actually explains that he's making contact in a particular area. And this is what isn't in Ted Williams' book, and this is where people get really confused because they say, well, Ted said swing up. Well, let's see what happens when you swing up and you are too early.
Examples are Al Kaline and Billy Williams. Kaline's swing and impact is up, the flat part of his bat in the trajectory of the ball as long as possible.
All right, so his swing at contact is up. That doesn't mean his swing is up the entire time. Let's watch again.
Examples are Al Kaline and Billy Williams. Kaline's swing and impact is up, the flat part of his bat in the trajectory of the ball as long as possible.
And that was a result, if you saw what the ball was doing, is going to probably hop about 10 feet in front of second base. So if you're trying to hit the ball out in front, or let's say if you weren't trying to hit the ball out in front, if you were trying to hit the ball back, but you had this lift swing like we saw Joey Gallo or Chaz demonstrating, then the outcomes are fly ball or ground ball. And one of the problems with this paradigm, obviously, you're eliminating the line drive, which results in a lot of hits. You'd have to change your swing path in order to hit a line drive. Instead of swinging up, you'd actually somehow say, I'm going to have to start swinging at this angle at this point. Well, because it takes reaction time for a new message to be sent, then you're not going to time the ball very well. You're going to take some pretty ugly swings. If you get a hit and it's a line drive, it was pretty lucky. So let's see. Let's run through our we showed chairs. Okay, let's go to some of my hitters and discuss that. Yeah, let's do a couple there. The Cirillo TA. And before we transition to that, I taught everyone that I've ever trained the same things that are in Ted Williams' book, except for what I did was I interpreted what he said by paying attention to what he was doing. And I correlated the two. And I said, well, some things he says can be misconstrued because he's talking about upswings. And the fact is that he doesn't actually have an uppercut swing. And he even said in that earlier 1961 audio clip that that's a terrible idea. And I don't think he ever got away from that. But if you were wanting to hit the ball to all fields, you wouldn't want to have an upswing. And if you don't have the strength, and that's one of the things that I see with a lot of youth players, you're teaching them to swing up at the ball and hit the ball to center field, particularly like Alan Nathan said, instead of hitting a line drive, you want to hit a fly ball. If everything worked out perfectly and you had the strength, then you could hit fly balls to center field. But a lot of kids don't have that kind of strength. Again, you have to be absolutely precise with your offset. You have to be precise with your timing. Everything has to be in line. If you were pulling the ball and it was an inside pitch instead of a middle pitch, then some of that offset can be off. You could hit a 40-degree launch angle that isn't optimal. It's over optimal, but because the distance of the fence is so short, you can still get it over the fence. I've watched some high school kids hit the ball with like fairly ridiculous launch angles, but still get it over the fence. Now, that fence is 325 feet away. If you were to hit that to center field, then it would have been disastrous. It's a 325-foot fly ball. So having a swing that isn't always a sellout upswing is a great idea. With a downward swing that arcs to level and then re-arcs back upwards, then you have the option of hitting all kinds of balls based on your timing and your intent. You can hit the ball on a line, you can hit the ball to right field, center field, and left field, and particularly if you're going to hit the ball to left field, the ball as a right-handed hitter. So if you're going to hit the ball to a pull field, it should always be lifted or you mistimed or changed your swing path. If you hit a line drive to left, I'd have players that would get a line drive to left field, and they're right-handed hitters, and they'd get a double, and they'd come back, and I'd say, 9 out of 10 times that's an out. That's going to go to shortstop or third base. Just remember that. You want to get the ball as your bat's arcing up. What they did was they tightened, chicken-winged, and came around the ball and created that line drive path, or more often than not, it's going to carry down under the ground for a ground out or a line out to short or third. Okay, so here's one of my hitters, a big league guy, Jeff Cirillo, and he has been taught the same thing my other hitters that I'm going to show you have been taught. So go ahead and transition into Jeff. Here's Jeff, and he's got that one a little bit out in front, and this one's going to go oppo on line. And again, we'll just run through this a couple times. Okay, now let's go to Matt. Matt is being trained by the same guy. Matt has been trained by, Matt's been trained by the same guy as Jeff and been trained the same type of a swing path, yet this is a guy who, in this particular season that we're going to be looking at this swing in, led Double-A, won a home run derby, hit at least 10 balls over 500 feet in that season, and hit 32 home runs to lead minor league baseball with homers that season. So let's go ahead and look at Matt. Same swing as Jeff. Jeff, not a home run guy. Now here's Matt. Bang. Does this look like a down to up swing? Yes. Does this look like Joey Gallo swing? No. And I have news for you. Poor Matt, had he played in a different era, if he played a few years later, instead of being a guy who started out his career in professional ball in 2004 or 5, if he were playing today, this guy would be a big league star because, and I have all of these on video. He hit so many balls over 500, and in the Major League Baseball, by the way, there hasn't been a recorded 500-foot home run since 1999, when I think they started using TrackMan or whatever it was. So it's Aaron Judge hasn't hit a ball 500 in a game. Matt has in one season hit at least 10. Okay, so let's go on to Jared. Here's another one of my hitters who was more of a power guy. And no, Jared in one swing, yeah. And here's another guy. He hit 2 home runs in 1 inning in this game here. This is the same one over and over again. Down and then catching the ball at its ascent and pulling it. So can you, let's go to me now, can you arrive at an optimal attack angle by swinging down on a pitch? Yes, absolutely. Every hitter I've ever trained. Matt and Jared, who you just saw, were hitters that would hunt the ball out front. Okay, and so what I mean by hunt the ball out front is what Barry Bonds did. Barry Bonds stood on top of the plate, in fact, so that he didn't have an outside pitch. He was so close to the plate, and he wore some armor on his elbow and made sure that if he got hit, it wasn't going to hurt, and pulled a lot of baseballs. And he was hunting the ball out front, which is what Ted Williams did. And we're going to talk a little bit about Ted Williams' strike zone in a moment. I'm going to take a break for a second here and have something to drink and take a look and see, do we have anybody who has any questions yet? And we don't have any questions yet. I'm the only one that typed up there. All right. So I guess we'll continue on. Here's Ted Williams' strike zone. So and this is a good one. This is a bit of an extended conversation on this. It's his hot and cold zones, and he discusses in another clip that I can show you later if we get to that, how this lower area down here on the outside for him is a weak area, and he doesn't hit a lot, for average or power down there, and that's a weak area for most hitters. The reason is we can do very little damage to it, and it's really, really hard to lift that ball. Now, we talked about how Ted Williams was a pull hitter, and that's going to come into play based on his hot and cold zones. Ted Williams was not a guy who was looking to hit the ball to the opposite field, and so again, aside from hitting the ball with the upward trajectory of his barrel, he also, on outside pitches, would broaden his swing arc. And so those of us who would hit the ball to the opposite field in some situations by swinging forward and allowing the ball to get back on us and making contact with the ball in the barrel in our first third of our swing, driving it over here, our path would be a bit of a tighter path. We would be throwing basically our hands towards the pitcher's, if I was a right-handed hitter, which I am, throwing the bat towards the pitcher's right knee, or my hands, essentially. And what Ted would do would bring his hands out and around some of these up pitches. Well, if you try to imagine hitting a lower pitch in the zone and reaching around it, it's not going to work out well. But when the ball's elevated in the zone, and I think Alonso did this in Home Run Derby with one of his swings, where when he won the Home Run Derby, the All-Star game, I remember vividly watching him get a middle outside, but the ball was elevated. And a lot of times you'll spit on the outside pitches, but he went after this one because it was up in the zone and he has a lot of strength. And so he broadened his swing arc and came out and around so that he could meet the ball out in front. And then he dropped a bomb with that one. Well, just a slight tangent on this. If we look at Ted Williams's averages, and this comes to bear with our discussion on guys like Devin Morgan saying, well, Ted Williams said so. We have this tendency to put a lot of faith in the people that we believe in and say, well, whatever they say is a fact, and therefore I'll repeat that or I'll live by that. We have a batting average for each and every one of these balls. Most strike zones are built basically like there's 25 different contact points, and so the reason that is that anything that's kind of close to it is essentially timed the same. It's going to basically go the same direction by a few feet one way or the other, and so I wouldn't have a zone that was quite this tight. Well, in order for these averages to be accurate, Ted would have had to have known every ball he swung at from the time he was a rookie until the end of his career. Didn't have StatCast, didn't have center field cameras at every game and side cameras and all this stuff. There's virtually no way. This is a guesstimate. This is maybe I'll take a small sample and say this is what my averages were, and these were something that I might have written down in the dugout after an at bat, and said, okay, well, down away pitch in this one. Well, first of all, I don't know that you could get accurately that tight a zone. You wouldn't know each and every one of those balls, which kind of makes sense because most of these are in the outer part where he doesn't hit very well, the same average for a couple of different spaces. But there's no possible way that he would know what his average was. Because Ted Williams put it in his book, because Ted Williams is so respected and arguably the greatest hitter of all time, we say, well, it's got to be a fact. Well, that's kind of like the funny stuff with numbers. So let's go to me, and I'm going to step back, and I'm going to take a question a second because I just saw that Gary sent me a question. Okay, so here we are with this pitch over the middle of the plate. And this is my sweet spot arriving on this ball. This ball is going to get driven right back at the camera. This is going to go right back to center field. Now, when we talk about that increase of space in respect to our approach, I don't care if I swung up at this. This is going to go to center, but it's going to go up in the air. This one's going to go more on a line. This one would go on the ground because I'm catching the top of it. But either way, there's my sweet spot. Now, if I wanted to pull this ball, or if I would have to catch it farther out in front, and so if I wanted to pull that ball, I'd have to roll my swing over to get this to go over there, and this is going to go on the ground, or I'm going to have to change my position to this ball. The ball's going to have to be farther out in front for me. So now I'll back up on it. So now it's farther out in front. It's going to get pulled, but look at this. It's coming off the end of my bat because now the ball is farther out in front. It will get pulled, but it's going to come off the end. So in order for me to be able to pull this ball, like Ted Williams, I'm going to have to take a broader swing arc for my sweet spot to get to this ball. And I'm not taking a regular swing because I got a wall right behind me. But now my sweet spot's there, but I had to change the size of my arc. If I kept the same arc, where I was talking about throwing my hands to the pitcher's knee, here it is coming off the end of my bat. Here it is. Yep, there we go. See, I told you. So there we go. On the sweet spot, I have to bring my hands out and around to get to this ball. So we'd have to change our swing arc entirely, and that's what pull hitters do. And you remember, you're also going to have a lot of strength to do that because the broader my arc is, the more energy you're going to have to produce for it to create that contact point outside. So let's go to Gary's question. It says, do you think he hit with pitches better waist high to chest high, better because of the flat path? Not better because of the flat path, no. It had more to do with his intent. He hit the ball better when it was bell tying up because of his intent. And his intent was, I want to pull the ball. All right? And so there's evidence to back this. This isn't my opinion. He hit the ball to right field and they created a shift. So when the ball's elevated, it's a lot easier and you have a greater variety of pitches that you're able to create that larger swing arc on. When they're lower, I can't create that same broadened swing arc. And you're correcting your spelling. Oh, poor Jeff's jersey. Yes, I know. Poor Glass, the jersey is fine. So I would say Ted Williams didn't necessarily hit upper pitches because of his flat bat path. No. Again, his flat bat path wasn't really flat because, again, his intent was to meet the ball out front and his barrel was ascending up towards the ball. Gary obviously has recognized that I'm not talking smack, that the swing that we're looking at today with a lot of hitters, a lot of big league guys who are sacrificing average power, take a ridiculously exaggerated upward swing path towards that ball that doesn't favor hitting the ball well very often. And the thing is that you don't have to sacrifice average for power, right? And that's the thing I was trying to illustrate, and what I'm showing you with Ted Williams' swing is Ted Williams didn't sacrifice average for power. Ted Williams hit for power and for average. If a hitter were to choose to be a dead pull hitter in today's game and change his swing arc, they would probably have a better average. But when you're meeting the ball back here with this upswing, then again, two outcomes possible, and then the third outcome is you're going to swing and miss and strike out, and so that's where Joey Gallo comes back into the conversation. Let's see, what else do I have here for you on... I'll give you a quick one again. This guy didn't hit for the highest average. Again, he would be a big league player. And he had more of a Ted Williams type swing that was down to the ball, flat through, and then elevating. And he could hit the ball to all fields for power. Remember, this guy was also 6'5", 245 pounds of solid muscle. And so that's one of the things you have to consider when you talk about being a power hitter. And here we go, watch a few swings of his. But you're going to notice that he most definitely is not taking an upward swing. He's catching the ball out front. He hit it off of his face and shoulder. Or that one. They're both the same thing. That's two. And one of them went off his face. And all right. So since I'm not scripted, I don't know exactly where I've gone with this. Do we have any other kind of questions? I guess, Gary's not shy, so you can steer the questions all you want, and I'll be happy to answer those. I think I went on for about an hour talking about all kinds of things. Did we show Ted Williams? Yeah, we showed all his swings. That one. Yeah, so we've gone through all of our scenes here. There's number two. Let's go to Ted Williams number two. Let's hear Ted talk about this. Yeah.
As I make my decision to swing...
Oh, we've seen this one. It's Ted 1 then, sorry.
Opening up into the pitch.
Okay, we'll give you another one. And if any of you guys that play for Gary are here today, then Gary and I have, go ahead and pause this thing. Gary and I have had conversations into the wee hours of the morning on his side. I'm in California, and I'm talking to him at, maybe we start talking at midnight my time, which is 3 his time, and we're talking well into sunset for him. That's how much he cares about learning about baseball. It's pretty, I got to applaud him for that. It's pretty amazing. All right, Ian. Well, your coach puts in so much work that you don't know about. It's really ridiculous. I'm a guy who's really happy to talk to just about anybody. And I say just about. Some people call to harangue me. They were sent by agents of chaos. But I still talk to them anyways. But Gary is a guy who is always asking me questions in private messages, or I'll say, you know what, this is too much for me to type, let's get on the phone. And so we've had several conversations that were like 4 hours long. Yeah, Gary does not sleep. I totally agree with you, Ian. Okay, so let's get a look at Ted again, talking about his swing, and go ahead, transition into that. And let's
Here are a few rules to follow.
Oh, this is the video.
Number one, the best swing is a level swing.
Clip one.
Okay. Which one?
It says Ted Williams, clip 1, I believe.
There's nothing with that.
I must have skipped it. Yeah, there it is. Snip 1.
There we go.
A lot of people say to swing level, which isn't too
Well,
bad.
we've seen this one.
Others say to swing down with the ball,
There
which
should
I
be
think
two.
is real bad. But to me, the ideal swing has always been one that was slightly up, slightly up.
Examples are Al and Billy
So
Williams.
Ted, no, keep
Kaline's swing
Ted
and
actually
impact is up.
took a
The
swing there
back
for you,
part of the
and it
bat
wasn't
is the
up.
trajectory of the ball as long as possible. As he comes into the ball, the swing starts up. The critical area of impact, the impact
swing
zone,
starts up
is 12 to 18
at impact.
inches. The longer the bat is kept on the plane of the pitch, the longer the impact zone.
Ted is another
When the
one.
bat is swung level or down, the impact zone is drastically reduced.
Incorrect.
Here's my strike zone.
So yeah, here's Ted talking about his strike zone.
Best for me, where I consistently hit the ball with authority. The ones that were tougher, especially the low outside pitch, I learned to lay off of. Sure, you get occasional base hits from pitches in the gray area, but more often than not, you hit a bad pitch, a tough spot, nothing happens. Nothing. I would take pitches like that, let them go by. I believe this. A good hitter can hit a pitch that is over the plate 3 times better than a great hitter can hit a questionable pitch that is in a tough spot.
And let's try to transition back to me. So I will teach hitters to have a swing that has as much adjustability as possible. And I focus a great deal on teaching everyone how to pull and how to pull properly. I think that would be a great topic for another live stream. Something we can talk about there that I won't go off on a tangent on here is talking about why it's so difficult to pull the ball, why it's so important to learn how to pull the ball, and more importantly, why you should want to pull the ball and the psychological edge that offers you over a pitcher. But let's look at the proportions of a baseball field. And if you look at the corners, we're talking about, let's say on an average Major League Baseball field, 325 to 340 feet down the lines. And some are even shorter than that. But let's just say on average it's about 330 down the lines. Dead center field, on average, 400 feet. And so we have some that are larger than that, a couple in parks that are really hard to hit in are smaller, like Dodger Stadium. But let's say 400 is the average and 330 down the lines. Why is it that center field is so large? And I've heard an instructor once, and I won't talk over another instructor when he's doing a lesson, but I shake my head in my own cage and just go, wow, that's so off, it's ridiculous. We talked about the 3/3 of your swing and where you're hitting the ball with the greatest amount of power is where you'll generate the most bat speed, and that would be in a pull situation where your bat is covered the most amount of ground, and then also gets the advantage of that whip towards the end of the swing when it passes your hands. So if it's easier to hit a ball far in a pull field, why are the pull fields so short? Because the field is built proportionate to ease of execution, not strength. And so when I say ease of execution, think about pulling a ball, let's say like Ted Williams' weak side down in the lower outside corner. If you try to pull that ball, what's it going to do? It's going to pop up to second base if you're a right-handed hitter, or it's going to go on the ground to third or short because you're going to get around it and you're going to get that rollover. You could hit that ball to right field and get a base hit. And then the low way is pretty much the extreme example of that is you can only hit it to one place. Now, if the ball's elevated on the outside, can you pull it? Yes. So if I have a ball bell tying up and going to Gary's question, hitting approach 2, okay, we'll get to that. Going to Gary's question about Ted Williams hitting elevated pitches, well, I can pull those pitches, but I have to have a great deal of strength. So generally, you're going to see the elevated pitches going more towards center field. And you can hit some of those elevated pitches pretty hard to center field. And so since it's easier to hit that to center field, then we build that part of the park bigger. Now we have the middle pitch. which I could pull, but it's going to go into the alleys, which are deeper than down the line. If I try to pull a pitch over the middle, then I might tend to hook that ball a little bit. So ease of execution, I hit so many pitches. The outside elevated pitch, I could hit to center field, or I could hit it to right field. The middle pitch, I can hit it to right field, I can hit it to center field, or I can even hit it to left field if I'm strong. The inside pitch, unless you're inside outing it, which I don't recommend, it's really, really difficult to do that. So don't bother looking at J.D. Martinez as your model and say, well, let's inside out the ball to right center field. The inside pitch basically has to be pulled. You can't hit it to a lot of spots. And you have to meet the ball out front. And when we talk about that in another discussion, we'll talk about the percentages of success in Major League Baseball based on location. And we'll also talk about the contact points for those locations. And that's one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about is relating contact points to positions in and out on the strike zone. And so difficulty always, you will see, is reflected by how much farther out in front or away from our body contact is made. So I think I've pretty much covered everything I want to cover. I'll have to go back and look at this and I'll say, gee, I didn't say this or didn't say that because I didn't script this out. I just ran through a whole lot of information. I would love to answer any more questions that you guys have. If Gary, if you want to expand on that question about hitting approach 2, I don't know what that means. What would you like to know about hitting approach? Why is an inside-out swing undesirable? Okay, great question. Essentially, you're going to have to force. Remember, if I throw this bat, the barrel wants to turn, right? So in order for me to take an inside pitch, and this is what we call an inside-out swing, it's been redefined by people, and I can give you the other explanation later. But what happens is, if I have this pitch, in order for this pitch to go to the opposite field, then I'm going to have to let it get deeper. So in order for me to get it deeper, remember, I would want to hit this ball here, but since I'm going to hit to the opposite field, I have to let it get back to here. Well, I'm going to have to force my hands to stay here to get this ball to go to the opposite field. And so I actually have to fight with the ball a bit. I'm intentionally making myself late and then fighting with the ball. So again, when you look at a big league player, try really, really hard to understand that these guys are freakishly strong. Right, J.D. Martinez is a big, big guy. Again, I showed you one of my hitters who was a home run guy. 245 pounds of solid muscle, 6'5", right? And that's a guy who has the strength to hit a ball 500 feet. And he can inside out a ball to the opposite field. If that's what were to have happened, it probably wouldn't be what he desired to do. So that would be the reason why I would say I wouldn't recommend inside outing unless you didn't want to hit the ball real hard. And again, so now you're meeting the ball at a third of your swing as opposed to 2/3 or 3/3 on a pull pitch. You're meeting the ball with less bat speed. So a guy like Tony Gwynn or maybe even a Wade Boggs was a guy who might intentionally inside out a ball because they were kind of trying to be masters of the field, being able to hit the ball anywhere they wanted to at any time. They might have seen a weakness in the defense and said, okay, I'm going to hit the ball to right field or left field and get behind the ball. So that's basically the reason why I wouldn't recommend inside outing. I'd recommend just hitting the ball as hard as you could based on the location of the pitch and going with that pitch. If you're a strong guy, hunt the ball out in front and maybe create a slightly broader swing arc the way Ted did so that most all of your swings result in balls that are pulled. Or hunt pitches that are inside, which is something that I really like to focus on with my hitters. Most guys are taught to hit the ball the opposite way because of the stigma with pulling, so that's great. So they're really, really pretty efficient at hitting the ball the other way when I get to some of these guys at high school or college or early professional. Jeff Cirillo was one of those guys who I said, no, you can pull. And so in the latter part of his career, he really learned how to pull the ball. So I would recommend hunting the ball out in front on the inside if you were a guy who wanted to hit home runs and things like that. So let's see. I was just saying hitting approach was a topic. Oh yeah, hitting approach is definitely a topic down the road. We will be talking about that. Stanton versus JD would be a good comparison. Stanton, okay, here's an interesting one. Most hitters, I don't care. Jeff Fry is a great example of this. Jeff Fry is a guy who says in order to be a big league player, and he's right in this sense, that you have to have it. Well, that it has everything to do with timing. And that breaks down to a number of different components. In order to have timing, I can't be afraid. And that's where Jeff was a guy who excelled. He was a bulldog. You can tell by looking at him. He's a shorter guy who had to compensate for a lack of size and stature with an aggressiveness. Gary and I have talked about this. The little brother of a slightly older brother is always going to be the better athlete because they get this intangible fight in them because they had to compete with a brother that was close enough in age to play with, but was a better athlete because he was more mature. And so the younger guy will compensate by becoming incredibly aggressive. So back to the topic, these guys don't know a lot about their swings. And I find that there are a lot of guys, particularly in today's game, that are fairly soft-skilled in terms of baseball knowledge. And they're guys like the driveline guys who are reading Ted Williams' words, taking them verbatim and going out and teaching that stuff, as opposed to looking at it and saying, okay, let me really better understand this. Because I don't know if any of you have read the book Science of Hitting. It's like a fourth grade level read. It's not a tough read. And so I don't think it was intended to be a tough read. And I don't think it was intended to be the canon of baseball hitting, whatever you want to call it, like the absolute Bible of hitting. I don't think he intended it that way. It just became that on its own. So Stanton, interesting guy, very broad swing, big broad swing. And so when a swing is broad, remember, the broader it gets, the more energy it has going away from me. And so as the energy of the bat, remember this barrel's heavy and it wants to run that direction if I bring a broad swing with it. And so what Stanton has to do is pull it back in line so it makes it circle. And so he has a very chest-oriented swing. So rather than, this was a really bad idea. He was getting his chest open too soon. Now when you have a broad swing, you have to use your energy longer. And so, because like I said, the bat wants to run that direction when I have this throwing out swing. And so your chest, the longer you have your chest engaged with your swing, it's going to turn and take your bat with it. And so he was getting out of the zone too soon. And so what Stanton did was he closed his stance. And so now instead of Stanton standing in the batter's box like this, how he once did, he began addressing the plate like this. And so this is what a lot of guys will do to compensate for that opening of the chest. Now, I would say, well, how about we just shorten the duration of your energy rather than creating a mechanic to compensate for a flaw? Because as soon as you create a mechanic to compensate for a flaw, then you've now created a new flaw, right? And so that flaw in that stance is, there are hitters that I've found that stand with a closed stance naturally on their own. And those are hitters that I immediately send to eye doctors, because 9 out of 10 times, or 9.5 out of 10 times, if a hitter chose to have a closed stance, that means that his back eye, as a right-handed hitter, and let's say this might be my dominant eye, my right eye, I'm trying to bury it for some reason or another. And that means that I have a weakened eye that I want to get out of the way so that it isn't trying to dominate the event and say, this is the eye I want to see through. And so a hitter will stand in that position so that they bury that less dominant eye, or that eye that has some kind of deficiency in it. You can't just make him stand normally, because he won't be able to see, because he's doing this intuitively. Stanton closed his stance, and therefore now he has He's still doing the same swing flaw by using too much chest, but now he's keeping his bat in the zone longer because he's standing at this hard angle. He's probably also giving himself a worse visual perspective because he probably didn't want to bury his eye as we would if we had a flaw. So that's the reason for that one. Watching old games of the 60s and 70s, most every hitter seemed to have a closed stance. I wouldn't say most hitters, because I grew up during that era, particularly in the 70s. I started seeing baseball games, I think, in 1968, where I was 4. And I don't know, at 4 I was paying a whole lot of attention to where people's feet were standing. But most definitely through the 70s, I was very, very active in watching baseball. And my favorite team being the Cincinnati Reds. I don't believe I can remember any of those guys with a closed stance. Hank Aaron was a product of the 50s, 60s, and 70s and did not have a closed stance. Closed stances, again, are compensations for errors, and this is what a lot of instructors will do. And let's say a hitter hit 280 with his closed stance and he hit his 30 bombs, and everybody would say, well, that's great, and that was terrific. Well, I don't know, maybe he could have hit 330 if he wasn't standing closed. But again, for me, the idea is to not create a mechanic to compensate for a flaw. The idea is to work on the flaw, identify why the flaw is there to start with, and say, okay, why is the hitter stepping in the bucket? Why is the hitter standing with a closed stance? All of those things, rather than saying, you're not supposed to do that, instead I say, okay, let's determine what the cause of that was and then work on that. If it was a guy who was standing closed, and I'll talk about a tilt in a second, if it's a guy who's standing closed on his own naturally, the first thing I do is say, did somebody teach you to do that? If they say no, I said, okay, I think it would be a good idea to have your eyes your eyes tested. And it's more than just, to see for acuity, because there are you could have 20/20 vision and still have dominance issues to where your eyes want to bounce back and forth and change dominance. And anybody, if you look at your finger and cover one eye and then cover the other, you're going to notice that your finger appears to be moving when it isn't. And so when the ball's flying at you and you don't know this is happening and you're bouncing between eyes, then it makes for a timing nightmare. There was a catcher with the Mariners that was doing that one of my friends who was the eye trainer for the Mariners had to work a ton on with and help him with that flaw, with that problem with his eyes. But so yeah, I'm going to say I don't know that there are that many guys that I remember with closed stances. There were some, and the reason would be there wasn't a whole lot of analysis. There was a lot of like, hey, I stood closed and it worked great for me, so I teach guys to stand closed. That seems to be what a lot of instruction is like, which I caution any of you young guys out there that are watching. If you have a coach that the first thing he does when he's explaining something mechanically is, when I was playing, because if the guy is using himself as a reference at all times, he's not paying any attention to you. He's just thinking about him and his career and what he did, and who knows if it was even optimal for him. Hard to say. I'm a consistent stride to the pitch. Okay, expand on that question. I think you're talking about timing. Is that right, Gary? Consistent stride versus stride to the pitch, right? So you're talking about timing. So you're talking about yeah, I don't remember that part, so I'm not sure I know what you mean by that. Ted liked to stride forward. Sure. Okay. And again, Ted probably, well, no, he didn't probably. He had 20/10 vision. It was the best that the U.S. Air Corps had ever tested. So Ty Cobb slided the ball. Okay, so striding to the ball, again, Ty Cobb had a very different approach to what he wanted to do. And there aren't a lot of guys that are going to hit like that today. Ty Cobb was all about hitting the ball into different spots. And he may have long before he even saw a pitch or decided to swing, already had an idea of where he wanted to hit a ball. And so he might have set himself up to do that. He wasn't thinking about optimum power. He wasn't trying to work with physics and say, in order for me to produce the strongest swing, my bat, regardless if I want to hit it to that field, or that field, my bat always has to go in a direction that counters the energy of the ball. So the ball's always traveling towards me, then my energy always has to go towards here. Ty Cobb wasn't living by that because he didn't really care how hard he hit it. He just wanted to poke it over an infielder's head and get it into the outfield and get himself on base. Which is interesting. There's a guy named Joe Ross who was the hitting coach for the University of Washington. And I would get a lot of their coaches were former players of UW or guys that were looking for winter work, and they were still at UW. And they would teach some of the guys that I was training, they would say, when you're hitting a ball to right field, again, I'm a right-handed hitter, so in order to hit a ball to right field hard, you want to drive your energy through the ball, right, into right field. And that's completely nonsensical because, again, like I said, if I'm swinging east and the ball's traveling from north, whatever, I'm not great with directions, but if I'm swinging to try to hit the ball with maximum force, then I have to counter its energy. Its energy is traveling this way, not this way. So I can't swing this way and expect to have maximum force. Cobb couldn't face the same velo or movement. Yes, he could. Ian, you're you're falling for a trap that we believe that the athletes of today were better than the athletes of yesteryear. Ty Cobb could hit Walter Johnson, and Walter Johnson threw 100 plus. They didn't have the technology then that they have today to be able to test it. They tested Walter Johnson with a motorcycle rider. A guy on a motorcycle went zipping by and he threw a ball and they said, well, he was traveling 100, so the ball was traveling 100. Either way, everybody said, wow, he threw really fast. And Ty Cobb could hit him. Something you have to understand, let's say Babe Ruth could hit a ball an incredible distance. What are the products that create exit velocity? Okay, the pitch contribution, the miles per hour pitch coming off the bat is a pretty minimal contribution in terms of the distance the ball is going to travel. So we're mainly reliant on the amount of force that we can deliver with the bat. And the way that we deliver force is through acceleration. So in order to hit a ball 450 feet, I have to be able to hit a ball with a certain amount of acceleration, bat acceleration, the weight of the bat and the velocity that this bat is traveling when it makes contact with the ball. So if Babe Ruth could hit a ball 480 feet or 490 feet or whatever it was, sometimes I think he hit some 500. Ted Williams hit some balls like 500 feet. That means they could generate the bat speed to hit the ball that far. In order to hit the ball that far, if I could generate that much bat speed, then I can catch up to pitches, even catch up to the pitches today. There are hitters that are hitting off of, what is his name? Jacob deGrom. Okay, there are guys that hit him that probably can't hit the ball 450 or 80 feet, right? But they can hit him. So they can generate enough bat speed to hit him. So if that's the case, then Ted Williams, who could hit the ball 490 feet, could also catch up to a guy like Jacob deGrom. So I most definitely wouldn't say he couldn't. The same velo or movement, Ty Cobb, interesting, different than a lot of the other guys that we might talk about historically. Ty Cobb was playing pre-1919 when the ball was, the reason why the ball is changed out regularly was because in 1920, I believe it was, a guy for the Cleveland Indians, I forget his name, got hit in the head and killed. And so he didn't even move. He didn't try to get out of the way because he couldn't see the ball. Because they used to spit chewing tobacco on the ball. They used to spit licorice on the ball. The ball was filthy. And if you don't think a ball that has snot or chewing tobacco or is scuffed or had shoe shine on it doesn't move crazily, you're out of your mind. The other thing is again, you're following along with what people are telling you as opposed to what the facts are. And that is, do you think that just because you can measure spin now that suddenly they're throwing it with spin and they weren't in like 1960 or 1919 or anything like that? Because that's crazy. That's called ethnocentric belief structures. That the particular generation that you're in is the ultimate generation. We haven't evolved that much. If we evolved that much physically, I assure you we would have evolved that much mentally and we would all be Einstein. So definitely not the case. Any other questions? Okay, so it looks like, I just gave it a couple seconds because there's a lag. It's a matter of approach and hitting style. Yes, approach and hitting style. It is a matter of. Okay, I'm not sure I remember what your question was. There's a lag between me talking to the camera and it arriving at you guys, so I give you a couple seconds when I say any other questions, and if there aren't any, I'm happy to stay here all night, but you guys probably want to get on your way at some point. Cobb stride was a matter of approach. Yes, okay, yes, that was the original question. It had to do with his hitting style. And again, like I said, most hitters were striding towards the pitcher. It isn't a terrible thing if you start in a normal position to where your feet are both facing forward together, equal to each other. If you were to stride and close your stride down, because the ball is coming in on you, then we call this tracking the ball, then closing your stance with your stride isn't a terrible thing. You could. I just don't know that I would want to. But it isn't something, if I had a hitter that wanted to do that, I'd ask them why they wanted to do it, and if it was a good enough reason, I'd say, well, then go nuts. But for the better part, I'd want to send my foot towards the pitcher because that's where I'm trying to set up all my energy so I can work in that direction. Again, because the ball's coming from that direction, then I want to be able to apply all of my energy and force counter to that ball. And so any kind of cross step is going to put me with a swing that's working a little bit. I'm dissipating a little bit of energy that way, so I don't know that I would bother doing that. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap it up, and this is my first ever live stream. I hope it went well. I hope you guys learned something, and I'll go over all of this myself and watch it and see how I can improve it. And Gary and I have talked about a few things that we'll do for future podcasts, talking about swing mechanics and things like that. I can't wait to talk about timing, and I can't wait to talk about technology. I have a vested interest in that particular subject, so I can't wait to talk about that. And that will probably be what my next cast will be about, is the golf sector in thank you, Frank. The golf sector in sports technology and that tech itself. We can talk all about that. So thank you guys again. It has been a great fun, and I look forward to watching this over and providing you with an even better one next time. Thanks.